for braving the torrential downpour that's going on. I'm noticing a lot of faces that I think didn't brave the weather today, but regardless, stay dry, and we do thank you for joining us here today. Let me go ahead and get started. So today, today, to get into this, before I want to get into this, I have to do a mid-year report. So I do 2 reports for our ministry. We do it in the beginning of January, and we also do it sometime in July. And so this is kind of, I have another one coming up in July. So I thought I'd share a little bit about how our ministry is doing. And for me, I didn't actually look until I did this report a couple days ago. And I was like, wow, we're doing okay. Like in terms of just numerically speaking. And so, now, I'm not going to get into this too much, but I wanted to show you that, especially last year we had a very tough start. We had a lot of people leave the ministry for various reasons. And so last year was kind of a year of recovery, but this year it's just been a relatively just stable community. I know there's a lot of people that come and go, which is just the nature of English ministry. But at the same time, I just wanted to acknowledge that, God is doing something. And particularly for our children grew 40%. So as you guys have noticed, as we go downstairs after service, it gets kind of crowded down there because there's a lot more kids that have been showing up these days. But for us, we grew about 20%, not bad. Again, I'm an engineer, I'm sorry if you didn't know that. But regardless, I just wanted to share with you that our ministry is it's doing well compared to previous years. And so we do want to just acknowledge that God is in the midst of us. So with that, to get into the passage today, now I do want to just preface this by saying, there's a reason why I'm talking about parents, and for some of us, this might be a somewhat sensitive subject. Maybe some of us might not have good relationships with our parents. Maybe some of us might not even know our parents. Or maybe some of us, our parents are in the same room with us. But regardless, the question I have today is, which of your parents were you more acclimated to or were before? So which parent were you more like close to, right? So, were you closer to your father? Were you closer to your mother, right? The passage I called today was Daddy's Boy, so obviously I have my own interpretation of what this character's focus was. But anybody out here kind of more more connected to their mother? Okay, so I'm a mama's boy too. I'm not proud. Any people more closely connected to their dad? Okay, so it's a little bit mixed. So we got some people that are more connected to their dads, more connected to their mothers. I'll get into a little bit of why later. But with that, let's look at Judges 9. We are continuing in our series in the book of Judges. We're going to go through the entire chapter of Judges 9. Starting with verse 1, open up your Bibles, smartphones, or look at the screen. Judges 9, starting with verse 1, where the Lord says this. Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, went to his mother's brothers in Shechem and said to them and to all his mother's clan, ask all the citizens of Shechem, which is better for you, to have all 70 of Jerubbaal's sons rule over you, or just one man? Remember, I am your flesh and blood. When the brothers repeated all this to the citizens of Shechem, they were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is related to us. They gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal Berith, and Abimelech used it to hire reckless scoundrels who became his followers. He went to his father's home in Ophrah, and on one stone murdered his 70 brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, escaped by hiding. Then all the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo gathered beside the great tree at the pillar in Shechem to crown Abimelech king. When Jotham was told about this, he climbed up to the top of Mount Gerizim and shouted to them, listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you. One day the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. They said to the olive tree, be our king. But the olive tree answered, should I give up my oil, by which both gods and humans are honored, to hold sway over the trees? Next the tree said to the fig tree, come and be our king. But the fig tree replied, should I give up my fruit, so good and sweet, to hold sway over the trees? Then the tree said to the vine, come and be our king. But the vine answered, should I give up my wine, which cheers both gods and humans, to hold sway over the trees? Finally, all the trees said to the thorn bush, come and be our king. The thorn bush said to the trees, if you really want to anoint me king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, then let fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon. Have you acted honorably and in good faith by making Abimelech king? Have you been fair to Jerubbaal and his family? Have you treated him as he deserves? Remember that my father fought for you and risked his life to rescue you from the hand of Midian. But today you have revolted against my father's family. You have murdered the 70 sons on a single stone, and have made Abimelech the son of his female slave king over the citizens of Shechem, because he is related to you. So have you acted honorably and in good faith toward Jerubbaal and his family today? If you have, may Abimelech be your joy, and may you be his too. But if you have not, let fire come out from Abimelech and consume you, the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from you, the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo, and consume Abimelech. Then Jotham fled, escaping to Beer, and he lived there because he was afraid of his brother Abimelech. After Abimelech had governed Israel 3 years, God stirred up animosity between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem, so that they acted treacherously against Abimelech. God did this in order that the crime against Jerubbaal, 70 sons, the shedding of their blood, might be avenged on their brother Abimelech and on the citizens of Shechem who had helped him murder his brothers. In opposition to him, the citizens of Shechem set men on the hilltops to ambush and rob everyone who passed by, and this was reported to Abimelech. Now Gaal, son of Ebed, moved with his clan into Shechem, and its citizens put their confidence in him. After they had gone out into the fields and gathered the grapes and trodden them, they held a festival in the temple of their God. While they were eating and drinking, they cursed Abimelech. Then Gaal, son of Ebed, said, who is Abimelech, and why should we Shechemites be subject to him? Isn't he Jerubbaal's son? And isn't Zebul his deputy? Serve the family of Hamor, Shechem's father. Why should we serve Abimelech? If only this people were under my command, then I would get rid of him. I would say to Abimelech, call out your whole army. When Zebul, the governor of the city, heard what Gaal, son of Ebed, said, he was very angry. Under cover, he sent messengers to Abimelech, saying, Gaal, son of Ebed, and his clan have come to Shechem and are stirring up the city against you. Now then, during the night, you and your men should come and lie in wait in the fields. In the morning at sunrise, advance against the city. When Gaal and his men come out against you, seize the opportunity to attack them. So Abimelech and his troops set out by night and took up concealed positions near Shechem in 4 companies. Now Gaal, son of Ebed, had gone out and was standing at the entrance of the city gate just as Abimelech and his troops came out from their hiding place. When Gaal saw them, he said to Zebul, look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains. Zebul replied, you mistake the shadows of the mountains for men. But Gaal spoke up again, look, people are coming down from the central hill, and a company is coming up from the direction of the diviner's tree. Then Zebul said to him, where is your big tongue now, you who said, who is Abimelech that we should be subject to him? Aren't these the men you ridiculed? Go out and fight them. So Gaal led out the citizens of Shechem and fought Abimelech. Abimelech chased him all the way to the entrance of the gate, and many were killed as they fled. Then Abimelech stayed in Arumah, and Zebul drove Gaal and his clan out of Shechem. The next day the people of Shechem went out to the fields, and this was reported to Abimelech. So he took his men, divided them into 3 companies, and set an ambush in the fields. When he saw the people coming out of the city, he rose to attack them. Abimelech and the companies with him rushed forward to a position at the entrance of the city gate. The 2 companies attacked those in the fields and struck them down. All that day Abimelech passed his attack against the city until he had captured it and killed its people. Then he destroyed the city and scattered salt over it. On hearing this, the citizens in the tower of Shechem went into the stronghold of the temple of El-Berith. When Abimelech heard that they had assembled there, he and all his men went out from Mount Zalmon. He took an axe and cut off some branches, which he lifted to his shoulders. He ordered the men with him, quick, do what you have seen me do. So all the men cut branches and followed Abimelech. They piled them against the stronghold and set it on fire with the people still inside. So all the people in the tower of Shechem, about 1,000 men and women, also died. Next, Abimelech went to Thebez and besieged it and captured it. Inside the city, however, was a strong tower to which all the men and women, all the people of the city had fled. They had locked themselves in and climbed up to the tower roof. Abimelech went to the tower and attacked it, but as he approached the entrance to the tower to set it on fire, a woman dropped an upper millstone on his head and cracked his skull. Hurriedly, he called to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and kill me so that they can't say a woman killed him." So his servant ran him through and he died. When the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead, they went home. Long passage? Nope, sorry. A couple verses. Thus God repaid the wickedness that Abimelech had gone to his father by murdering his 70 sons. God also made the people of Shechem pay for all their wickedness. The curse of Jotham, son of Jerubbaal, came on them. And that is the end of the passage. Alright, sorry about that. Again, you guys are probably like, what is this about? Like, this guy's going around killing people. There's like trees talking. There's like millstones falling from the sky. What is going on? I'll get to that in a minute. But just to remind us, our theme for this year, 2018, is Emmanuel, which means God with us through the wilderness. So whether we are going through seasons of joy or seasons of difficulty, our hope for this year is to have a better understanding of God's presence in our lives. And so we've been going through the book of Judges, and we've seen this cycle back and forth of how the Israelites constantly keep disobeying God. He gives them a season of peace, and then they fall away and they start worshiping other gods, and they start sinning against Him. And so He allows these people to come in and conquer them. And then they cry out under the oppression, and God raises up. God shows grace by raising up these judges, these deliverers, these people that rescue them out, and they're given peace again, and then the cycle continues. This is a cycle that we have seen again and again and again. This is now we're kind of in the halfway point of this series of judges. But we see that in the midst of this, God can send anyone. All these judges, some of them were qualified, most of them weren't. God is using anyone to deliver His people. And so last week we went through the latter part of the story of Gideon. And I really wanted to emphasize with Gideon that with Gideon, for the first time, we really see just how deeply his character was flawed. Right? And we saw this was a man who had vengeance on his heart. He desired vengeance against the death of his brothers, so he does horrible things. He kills his own fellow Jews. And he does all these things, and he even tells his son, kill these men, right? This little boy son of his. And you see the heart of Gideon is one of anger and hatred. And now what we're seeing in this chapter is basically the conclusion of the story of Gideon. Because this is not about Gideon, but this is about Gideon's son. Okay, so this is the conclusion of a story that started a few chapters ago. And so Abimelech, now I misspoke last week. I said Abimelech means son of the king. I should have known this. I should know my Hebrew. Av is father, Ben is son. So yes, I got it mixed up. So Abimelech actually means my father is king. And this was ironic because remember, Gideon was asked to be king and he refused. But he named his own son, my father is king. So that basically tells you Gideon saw himself as king. He just didn't take the title. Okay? So Abimelech, his name means my father is king. He is the son of Gideon and a Shechemite concubine. So the concubine, his mother, was not a Jew. So he was half Jewish, half Canaanite. Right? That in itself was an issue. God had told the Jews not to intermarry, not because God is racist, but because God knew that by intermarrying, that they would start to sin against Him. They would start to worship the gods of other people. There's a reason why God was telling them to stay within the people of Israel for that purpose. So this person, Abimelech, is a half-Jew. Okay? So already he probably had identity issues. Now, our ministry, we get a good amount of MKs here, and I always like to pick on MKs because MKs missionary kids, I mean by MKs. Missionary kids, usually they have issues with identity, right? There's a broader term, TCK, if you guys know what that is, third culture kid. So these are basically kids, their parents are from another country than the country they grow up in. So their parent ethnically is not from this nation, right? So automatically they have this, the primary, I guess, identity is the parent's identity. The secondary identity is the nation that they're in. And then because they're in this in-between, they make a third culture, right? And so now they're in this like in-between where like they don't know who they are. So every time I meet an MK and we start talking, I start joking with them like, you don't know who you are. She's like, no, can you tell me? And the interesting thing about people like TCKs and MKs is that the only people they get along with are other TCKs and MKs. Now I know some of you are shaking your heads, but that some of you guys are a little bit more adjusted, which is fine. But most MKs I know only have MK friends. I've gone to MK weddings and everybody is a missionary kid, right? Like there are like 80 nations represented at my wedding. But like that's one of the things is that they struggle with identity. And so I'm sure Abimelech in the same way, he's half Jewish, his father is acting like king, but then the other half of him is Shechem, he's a Canaanite. So, you know, he probably grew up very confused. Now, on a side thing, I had quite a few friends that were half Koreans, right? Now, I've been told, now I don't know how true this is anymore, but back then, I've been told by my half Korean friends that they preferred the term hapa. And it's a Hebrew, not Hebrew, it's a Hawaiian word. So it's a Hawaiian word that kind of, you know, it's people that are from mixed heritage, right? So they prefer the term hapa, half Asian, half something else, right? But yeah, like I was when I really think about who I was in college, I just kind of, I'm a little bit shocked. I was a bit of a jerk when I was in college. This particular half Korean guy, his name was Eric Kim. He didn't look Korean, he didn't look American, he actually looked Hispanic. And so I would tease him by like just yelling random Spanish words at him. Hey, I say it, like random things. And I realize now, and God keeps doing this flashing thing. I'm a sinner. But you know, I think just getting to my spiritual imagination, I really feel Abimelech in a similar way as people that are, you know, half Asian, people that grew up in different cultures. He probably had a lot of identity issues. And so he ends up using different parts of his identity to actually take advantage of his situation. So when we go through, we see that he had this desire. He had the desire to be the king. Right? His name, Abimelech, means my father is king. He's like, I too want to be king. Now growing up in my age, I don't know how easy it is to get the Burger King crown anymore. But back when I was a young child, you could only wear this when it was your birthday. Right? And so we would have these birthday parties at Burger King. This was a big deal in the 80s. We would have these birthday parties in Burger King, and this one child would wear the crown, and we would all have to, like, you know, kiss up to this Burger King. And so, like, as a kid, I remember in high school, I wrote an essay about this. My desire to wear the crown. To be the Burger King. Regardless, Abimelech desired to be king. He saw what his father was doing, that he was acting like king. He says, you know what, I can do this too. And so what he does is, he leverages his mother's relatives. His mother must have had relatives in a high position in Shechem, because he leverages them to win that entire city to support him. And so he takes, you know, he appeals to his mother's relatives, and they conspire together. Yes, we will make you the one king, not one of 70. We were going to get rid of those other 70. So actually, they pay 70 pieces, 70 shekels of silver to kill 70 men. Right? This shows you how little they value the lives of these people. 1 shekel, right? 1 piece of silver for 1 life. And so and it says like they hire, what was it in the NIV? Like ruthless, something. I saw in some other translation it was like mercenaries. So basically they're hiring hitmen, right? He's just hiring these random hitmen to take out his entire family. He kills almost all of his brothers, except one, Jotham, the youngest, gets away. Now Jotham's name means the Lord is kind, the Lord is perfect. So it's kind of interesting. He's the youngest. And again, if Gideon named him, maybe Gideon came around in faith later on. Because his name is a proclamation toward God. But he is the only one who's able to get away. Jotham gets away. And then he starts screaming. Right? It's kind of funny when you get to the story. He basically goes to Shechem and he's on the mountains. Right? So he's on a mountain near Shechem and he's yelling a fable. He's telling a story, but he's doing it at the top of his lungs. Kind of an interesting picture, right? Because he can't go into the city because they'll kill him. They killed all of his brothers already. So he's staying as far away as he can, but he's telling a story, a fable. Right? I know Jipsani mentioned Aesop's fable last week. This is basically Jotham's fable. Right? And so it's a long story. He's like, there were all these trees, and they wanted a king, and so they asked the olive tree, and the olive's like, no, people love my oil, blah, blah, blah. He asked was the fig tree, like, oh, like, my fruit is so sweet. And he's going through this fable, and basically through this story, he's showing how all the first trees were trees of value, of worth. And then it gets to the thorn bush, right? No one likes thorn bushes. And then the thorn bush itself speaks very ironically. If you want me to be your king, then find rest in my shade. Who rests behind a thorn bush for shade? Like literally, if you were maybe Ant-Man, like you could find shade in a thorn bush. But for most of us, you would never rest next to a thorn bush. And even if you wanted to, the closer you get to the thorn bush, it's going to prick you, right? So it's ironic. And then basically Jotham tells a story to invoke a curse upon these people, where he says, there's going to be a fire that comes out. And then he reminds them that if you had done what was right, if you had been honorable, then there would be no issue. But if you have not, then he says, then may Abimelech himself consume you like a fire, and then may you also consume him as a fire. So he's put this curse on these people. And so now you're left in this kind of crux of like, who's going to be right? Will Abimelech win or will Jotham win? Whose word will stand? Who is God going to support in this situation? And then ultimately the story continues, and so Jotham does end up being king roughly for about 3 years. He has a very short reign, and so 3 years pass. He's leading over all of Israel. Shechem has been supporting him. And then this is where God finally shows up. Up until this point, God has not been in this story at all. And then all of a sudden, verse 23, God shows up and says, God stirred up animosity. In some translation it says that God raised up an evil spirit. And so all of a sudden, these people who were friends of Abimelech, the citizens of Shechem, are now starting to think differently of him. They're starting to question why they're supporting him. They're starting to do negative things. It talks later about how they're like setting up ambushes in the highways and stuff like that. And then it gives you the reason. Verse 24 tells you God did this in order that all those bad things that Abimelech had done, killing these 70 brothers, would be repaid. This is in response to that. And so this man Gaal comes up, and this guy is a pure Shechemite. Abimelech was half Shechemite, but now this pure Shechemite comes out, and he's like, why are we listening to this man? If I were our leader, I would do this, blah, blah, blah. So this guy comes up and he's boasting, and he raises up the city, and he riles them up, and they all want to fight against Abimelech. But then very quickly, Abimelech shows up with an army, and he takes them out, and in a very horrifying way. He burns them alive in a tower. Right? This is a horrifying way to die. And then so he continues, as the story says, and he goes to this nearby city called Thebes, and he goes to continue to increase his power, and he comes up with the same plan. I'm going to burn this tower down as well. But then a woman drops a millstone on his head, and that's the end of the story. Okay? Now let me show you how big millstones are. Millstones are huge, right? So this is a strong woman to pick up one of this is like a relatively small millstone. This is one of the bigger ones down there. But this woman, she's like, uh-oh, here comes Abimelech. Bombs away. She drops a millstone. So this is honestly, I don't think he saw this coming. He's like, oh, what's that woman doing there? Oh my goodness. It's so he just, so that's the end of the story. So the ironic thing is Abimelech leverages his own mother's relationship, so he technically uses a woman, and the story ends with him getting killed by a woman. But he doesn't want to die that way, so he has his own servant kill him, right? So it's an interesting story. Now, why are we putting all this together? So he dies, the kingdom ends, and the story continues. Okay, so from next week, it's going to go back to the judges. But this is basically the ending of the story of Gideon, with his son and his son's desire to be king. So why was this happening? Basically, Abimelech wanted to be just like his dad, Gideon. Right? Gideon had become king, and Abimelech was like, I want to be king too. I have 70 brothers, and I'm going to take them out so that I'm the only one left, and I'm going to be king too. Now, I want to remind you, how is this all connected? First up, if we go back to the previous chapters, we see that Gideon, as I said before, was a very flawed man. And so you see, this is a list of many of the flaws that we saw in him. First, Gideon is known for being the one who keeps asking God for more signs. God gives him clear answers, and he keeps saying, you know what, God, why don't you do this? Why don't you do this? He's not willing to follow the will of God easily. He keeps asking for more signs. And then when it's very clear that God has given him the victory, Gideon kind of adds himself into the glory, where he's like, all right, guys, break this jar and light this torch and say, for the Lord and for Gideon. Right? He wanted to include himself into the glory. And then he didn't want Ephraim, which is like the rival tribe. He's from Manasseh. He wanted the rival tribe not to be involved, but then he asked them to get involved at the last second because he needed their help. But then, as we saw in chapter 8, he does some horrible things. He also tortures the 77 elders of this one city. And then he goes to another city, Peniel, and not only does he destroy their tower, he kills all the men. He does horrible things. And he did this because he wanted revenge, as I said before. There are these two men who killed his brothers. He wanted revenge against them. And so Gideon was not a good person. And even at the end of the day, when he asked for all the gold and he builds his ephod, he ends up creating more paganism, which turns people away from God. When we look at this, and you see this crazy story of Abimelech that I just read, now it starts to make sense. Now you're starting to see, okay, if this was my dad, then killing 70 of my brothers, that makes sense. We should do that. If this is my dad. And so basically what we see in this passage is generational sin. That the sins of Gideon has passed on to his son Abimelech. And so the reason why in the beginning I asked you, who are you more like? Are you more like your father or mother? Some of the things you'll start to recognize is that you start to take the character of your parents, whether you like it or not. And oftentimes, you take a lot of the negative traits of your parents. There are certain times where you're like, oh man, I hate my dad for this, blah, blah, blah. Or I hate my mom for this, blah, blah, blah. And then next thing you know, you're like, I'm becoming just like Especially when we start having children, I think this is when it really comes apparent. Like especially like, oh, I will never be so strict like my mom, blah, blah, blah. And then next thing you know, you have a kid. And before you even realize it, you're being just as strict as your mom, right? A lot of these times, these things just automatically pass over, even though we think we're going to be different. And so what I want us to understand is that sin is something that isn't just an individual action that stays with the individual. When we sin, when we choose to disobey God, not only does it put us at ends with God, it continues to move on in the next generation. This is what this passage is showing us, that the sins of Gideon have passed on to Abimelech, and Abimelech is doing the same types of things that he saw his father do. And so I know for me, when I was growing up in America, I could not have understood this, because as a Westerner, you are taught that you are an individual. And so everything, it's about your decisions, it's your plans. But the reality of what I've learned coming here to Korea is that things pass to the next generations. And in many ways, who we are oftentimes is a summation of the generations before us. So there are times when we are dealing with sins that are actually, they didn't start with us, they started generations before us. I think it's important for us to know there's a distinction. That we are sometimes dealing with the sins of our forefathers. Now it sounds unfair, but that's the reality, is that many times we are dealing with past generational issues. That's what we're seeing in this passage. Abimelech is still dealing with Gideon's sins, and this leads him to do these negative things. Now at the same time, I don't want, if I just ended it here, you guys would be like, oh my gosh, I will commit suicide so it stops. It's like you would logically be like, this is going to keep going on and on. Oh my gosh, like this is never going to end. You're like, my parents are horrible. That could be some conclusions that you might draw. And I want to say that, brothers and sisters, I hope to give you some hope before you leave tonight. I don't know how long you stay here. But anyway, I hope to impart some hope upon you. So what I want you to understand is that this chain can be broken. Right? This might be like a big snowball that started from generations before, and it might seem like something you can't stand up against. But brothers and sisters, I want you to understand that the chain of sin can end right now. Now I'm dating myself. There was a game that was popular when I was in high school called Killer Instinct. And this is I don't know if you guys even know this game anymore. Some of you might. But this was a game kind of in the same time as like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. But this was a game that you would do these like insane 20 to 30, 40 hit combos. Right? So someone would start a combo on you, and like you would just feel like you can't do anything because you're just like getting hit. You're like, oh, like that, right? But there was a thing you could do. You could do a button combination, and it would do like combo breaker, and it would end the combo, right? He's just laughing because he knows this game. Right? And so you could end the combo, and you could stop the negative thing that is happening. Right? You are getting beaten. You feel like you're going to lose the game, and you could do something to stop it. And brothers and sisters, what I want to tell you today is, regardless of how much that might have been passed from the generations onto you, it can end right now. What God also says in Exodus 20, and ironically this is in the very beginning of the Ten Commandments, He says, you shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation, to those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Now, yes, this passage reinforces that generation sin is real, but it also tells us that generational love will always win. The passage says generational sin will carry to the third and fourth generation, but it says that those who love me, those who obey me, that will last for thousands of generations. 3 and 4 is rough. That's about 100 years. But 1,000 is a long time. What God is telling us is when we choose to love Him, when we choose to obey Him, this can cover over whatever mess there might have been before us. Now, for those of you who know my testimony, I kind of come more from the line of being, as I've said before, I'm a 4th generation Christian. My grandmother's mother, right, my great-grandmother, became a Christian more than 100 years ago. And so this is passed on through the generations. And yes, there are things that my family deals with, but for the most part, my testimony is built on the fact that the generations before me have made a lot of right choices, have been very faithful to God. Some of you know, yes, this church is one of the ones founded by my uncle, blah, blah, blah. It's part of my spiritual heritage. But one of the things I realized that I had to come to Korea to realize was that when I look at my own testimony, so whenever I share my testimony, especially when I share it in Korean, I share it as 세상에 제일 재미없는 간증, right? The world's most boring testimony. And honestly, I have a boring testimony. I grew up in the church. I was like the goody two-shoes church kid. Nothing really bad happened to me. I didn't do drugs. I didn't drink. Blah blah. As I shared before, first time I ever had alcohol was at this church during communion. I was like, why does the blood of Jesus taste funny? It tastes like medicine. And so, for me, I have a very, very boring testimony. So boring that I actually cried about it. I was doing my quiet time. This is high school. I am not proud of this. I was in high school. I think I was in 10th grade. When I was in 10th grade, I was in my room, and I would because the thing is, I grew up in an age where a lot of these youth pastors would come, and they would come to our retreats, and they would share these crazy testimonies, how they were all drug dealers, gang members, they killed people, they had all these crazy things, and then God transformed them, and they had this 180, right? And I was literally crying because I was like, my testimony's boring. If anyone hears my testimony, they're going to be like, of course you believe in God. There's nothing that happened to you. And I was like, So my sister comes into the room. She hears me crying. My sister comes in. She was in college at the time. She was on break. She's like, why are you crying? And let me tell you first off, I'm not a crybaby. I could count on one hand the amount of times I've cried since I've, after my childhood. That was one of them. And I'm crying. I gotta stop saying that. My sister shows up. She's like, why are you crying? I tell her I have a boring testimony, and she's like, you're an idiot. And she's like, she told me, think about all the pain and suffering you didn't have to face because of God's faithfulness to you. That is your testimony. And that's what I didn't understand. I was wanting to go through hardship, and I was wanting to go through suffering so I could share about it later. But what I didn't realize was that God had been faithful to the prayers of the generations before me who asked God not to let me suffer in that way. And I realized coming here in Korea, for those of you that are new here, we need to fix our projector. But it seems like the timing of those things, God's reinforcing something. I don't know. But regardless, what I realized was my faith wasn't my home. And that my testimony was the fact that all my life I had been standing on the shoulders of giants before me. That was my testimony. That's what I realized, was that being a 4th generation believer and seeing how God had been faithful for these generations was a sign of generational love rather than generational sin. And as we look at the text, even though God only shows up at the end, many people would argue, even with the thing with the woman throwing the millstone and it perfectly landing on the head of Abimelech, they would say that's the invisible hand of God. And even though the passage doesn't say God was there, He was there. God was the one who orchestrated these things to happen. So even though it seems like Abimelech was going to win, God changed all of that in an instant. So brothers and sisters, my challenge and my encouragement for you today is that first I want you to recognize that some of the sins you're dealing with, some of the struggles that you have may have been passed from previous generations, but I want you to understand that they can end right now. And it's a matter of us choosing to love and obey God. It's a matter of us allowing His presence, which is here with us right now, to be at work and to move and to allow us to do things. The Spirit of God is the one who will actually bring about the transformation. But at the same time, we have to choose to follow the Spirit. We have to choose to obey God. Abimelech made a lot of bad choices in this text. And so at the end of the day, that's why his story ended that way. He made a lot of wrong choices. But as we choose to love and obey God, His ever-present hand will deliver us. And so as it's called Daddy's Boy, rather than us reflecting on the sins of our parents, it's understanding that God is our Father. That if we are to be Daddy's boys or girls, that it should be our Father in heaven. So let's take some time to pray and we'll go ahead and close for today. I want you to take a moment to just pray to God and ask God, are there any things that are being passed on from the generations that I need to deal with right now? Things that I haven't even recognized during my life. Things that were from my father, my grandfather, or whatever generation. Things that have passed over to me for whatever reason. What are these things? And help me, Lord, to see that you will lead me to overcome these issues. Let's take a moment to pray into this. So just take a moment to just pray that we would recognize the presence of God in our lives, that invisible hand, that it would actually start to seem more visible to us, that we would recognize the things that God is doing, the things that God is orchestrating in our lives, that we are not alone,